Aloha, everyone. I wanted to share with you a little bit about my mentor, Don Richardson, and share with you a little bit about what he went through in finding what I would call the peace child in the culture that he went to. Don Richardson went as a missionary to Irian Jaya, Papua New Guinea, um, when he was in his early 20s, a young man with his wife and a baby child. Um, he um, wanted to go to an unreached people group. And they asked him, oh, what kind of group do you want to go to in Papua New Guinea? You have headhunters, you have cannibals, and you have those that will just kill you and do nothing with your body afterwards. Which one do you choose? And he said, I really don't care. I just want to go to an unreached people group. And he was given a group who were headhunting cannibals, which is very rare around the world. Usually, people will either eat you or take your head, but not both. But he went to a people called the Sawi people who were headhunting cannibals. And not only that, these people esteemed uh, as one of their highest value treachery. And the more treacherous you were, the more they respected you. They had something that they called fattening with friendship, where the more I could fool you that to make you think I'm your friend and feed you and fatten you up and then kill you and eat you and take your head, I would be a great hero because I was so treacherous. And everyone would want to marry their daughters to me because of my great treachery. And this was their highest virtue. And so Don goes there, not only suffers through malaria and very difficult conditions, and there's no dictionary in their language. He has to figure everything out from scratch and really suffered through a lot for these people. And finally, when he learned the language enough to share the gospel with them in the man house, he shared the gospel, and these people began to worship Judas and lift up Judas and esteem Judas because he was so treacherous. And they started asking him, "Oh, Don, tell us more about this Judas. You know, he fooled Jesus for 3 years. That's longer than any of us did, and he betrayed Jesus with a kiss. That's a new technique. Tell us more about him and his techniques and his thinking and so on." And you can imagine after all the suffering that he went through to go to this people in the middle of the jungles of Papua New Guinea, the horrible weather, the mosquitoes, the bugs, the deadly animals, and so on, and all the time he spent there, that he preaches the gospel to these people, and they begin to worship Judas. Um, any of us, I think, would take the shoes off of our feet, shake out the dust, and say, you know, I did what you said, Lord. I told them the gospel, and they want to worship Judas, and go home. But Don just fell on his face and began to pray, and just crying out to God, saying, how can I reach these people? Uh, the next day, there was another war in front of his house. There was battles in front of his house all the time because they usually don't trust one another, and so they stay in separate villages far away from one another. But two of these Sawi villages moved next to where he was because they wanted his metal tools, iron axes and knives and cooking utensils and so on. They used wood and stone, so was very valuable to them, and they wanted them, but they would always fight. So here's another battle in front of his house on this muddy battlefield, and he goes out and he tells them, look, if you don't stop fighting, I'm going to leave. And so they both come together and say, Don, please don't leave. And he says, well, you guys got to make peace or I'm leaving. And they said, well, you got to understand, Don, that it's very difficult for us to make peace. And well, you can understand that because if I say I'm making peace with you, you don't know if I'm fattening you up to eat you and take your head, or if I really mean it. But they said, tomorrow we will make peace. So Don was really interested. What would they do? How could they do that? The next morning, the two sides lined up across this muddy battlefield, and suddenly he saw a young warrior running across the field with his baby son in his hands. It was his only son. And his wife running after him, screaming and crying, falling in the mud and putting the mud on her head and saying, why does our son have to be the sacrifice for peace? And in the midst of her wailing, he's thinking, they're going to kill this son. They're going to sacrifice him. And he was about to stop it when the young warrior placed this child in the hands of a warrior on the other side. And the warrior on the other side said, I accept this child as a basis for peace. And then everyone else laid their hands on this child and said, I accept this child as a basis for peace. And they had peace. And he was wondering, what was this? He couldn't understand. He didn't know what was happening. And he started researching what this child was all about. And he found out this child was called the peace child. And as long as the peace child lived, there was peace and between the two sides. And so he started thinking about it and said, where have I heard this before? This is familiar, where someone gives up his only son to make peace. And he started to research the words. And then he preached the gospel again in the madhouse, this time calling Jesus the peace child of God. You know, as Jesus said with the water, with the woman at the well, that if you drink of this water, you'll thirst again. Drink of the water I have. You'll never thirst again. Well, the peace child of God will never die, and so you will have peace forever. Anyway, he translated the words using the words that call Jesus the peace child, and the all of a sudden, all the men in the med house were very, very worried, and he asked them, "What's the matter?" And they said, "Don, why didn't you tell us that Jesus was the peace child before?" And he asked, "Why?" And they said, because whoever kills the peace child is the worst criminal in our society. So you see how God, he never left them without a witness. Even in this tribe of headhunting cannibals who thought treachery was the highest virtue, he left something for them that pointed, that we call in culture-specific evangelism, a signpost that points to Christ within their culture. And not only that, is that Judas, now instead of being the hero, he became the worst criminal in their society because he killed the peace child. And these people all began to say, the men began to say, we want to accept this peace child of God. And so what happened was they began to accept the peace child of God, Jesus, and virtually all the adults became Christians. And this is a difference when you find that peace child, that culture-specific evangelism for these people, where they can understand within their cultural context who Jesus is and what he did for them, and something that they can relate to, that's important to them because it comes out of their culture, something that shows that he's your God, that he's been here trying to speak to you and reach out to you. And because of that, this tribe that would have been Judas worshippers were now worshippers of Jesus, and virtually all the adults turned to Christ because of finding this key that unlocked the door to their understanding of who Christ was. This happened in the late 60s, early 70s. Don went back about 5 years ago, and still most of the adults are Christians, and they're starting to send missionaries to the other tribes. So the fruit is long lasting, and the fruit is proven. And so when we think about this, if God left a peace child for this tribe of headhunting cannibals that thought treachery was the highest virtue, surely he left something for the Japanese. And we found in Hawaii many different peace childs, many things that have helped the Hawaiians come to Christ. And there is really a revival among the Hawaiian people today. And there's peace childs within the Buddhist context. And we really have to open our eyes and start changing our cultural context and our way of looking at everything as evil and bad within the culture, because God has left things there. So as you think about these things this week, please also think about what kind of peace childs have God left within the Japanese culture.